Welcome, beloveds, to another Nurture the Soul. I am your co-host today, Reverend Ellie Hutchison, and I am the Minister for Congregational and Community Engagement with the Faith Info team. And we are a part of the Love of Church at the national setting of the United Church of Christ. Nurture the Soul is a weekly webinar that provides our local churches and faith practitioners with multitudes of practical, educational, innovative, formational resources in order to help us better engage with the critical topics of our time, to center care, to center the education for the people of God. From cultural organizing and community organizing to congregational leadership, from worship and theology to resourcing small and rural churches, from ministry alongside our youth and children, to a wide range of justice issues. I am blessed to be able to be in this virtual space with guest artists, authors, theologians, and key leaders. Nurture the Soul stays current to how the gospel is alive at this time. We hope that this is a space for connection, community, and nurture because we believe in the collective movement towards the world that God imagines for all of us. We invite you to join us every Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Nurture the Soul. And from time to time, look for special offerings. By the way, we have a lot of Nurture the Soul special offerings coming up this election season. And you can find a full list of upcoming digital program offerings at ucc.org/events. Or please take a look at any of our social media platforms where you can be connected to the UCC in that way. Beloveds and friends, if these conversations, if what is discussed today offers or enhances your ministry or your soul, please consider donating towards the annual fund of the United Church of Christ. And you can do this by texting the letters UCC to the numbers 41444. It is your prayerful and financial support that helps programs like this continue to dig deep into the essential work of the United Church of Christ. I want to thank you for supporting us, and thank you so much for being with us today. Today is part 2 of this 2-part series on economic justice with my colleague and friend, Reverend Seth Wispelwey. Seth is an educator, activist, organizer, and pastor, and currently serves as our Minister for Economic Justice at the national ministry setting of the United Church of Christ. For the past 20 years, Seth has worked for and led organizations in equipping and mobilizing people of faith of conscience to advocate for long-lasting justice for and alongside the poor, hungry, marginalized, and oppressed. He has crafted and stewarded successful advocacy campaigns at federal, state, and local levels, working with a wide range of organizations and partners, including Bread for the World, the International Justice Mission, and so many more. Seth says that God commissions us to establish economies that are built around deeply rooted justice, universal equity, and sustaining compassion so that all might thrive. We are here to manifest the canceling of debts, the meeting of needs, and the return of stolen land and wealth. And we are also joined by another amazing human today. It is Reverend Dr. Michael, who is our Religion-Labor Coordinator in the AFL-CIO Civil and Human Women's Rights Department, and he's based out of Washington, D.C. He became active in the labor movement as an undergraduate at Boston College. And before joining AFL-CIO in 1986, he worked alongside the J.P. Stevens boycott, the Brookside mine strike, and with the Carolina Brown Lung Project. He is a member and past officer of the Baltimore Washington Newspaper Guild, Local 32025. And while with the AFL-CIO, he has been a strategic campaign coordinator, has provided assistance for AFL-CIO affiliate union strikes, lockouts, boycotts, and organizing campaigns. Y'all, I have goosebumps with this. In 2021, he was named the Religion-Labor-Coordinator, and it's a position that he held from 1987 to 2001. He's a retired United Methodist minister in the Baltimore, Washington Conference, has a Master of Divinity degree and a Doctor of Ministry degree from Wesley Theological Seminary in DC. And he is married, has 2 grown kids, and lives with his wife's COVID rescue dog, Peaches. Labor Day, beloveds, is not just a time to celebrate working people and their contribution to our society. It is also a time to remember the struggle that workers have endured to achieve the many benefits that we now enjoy. Labor Day provides a unique opportunity for faith communities and organized labor to rediscover our common bonds: social justice, democracy, equality, the dignity of all people, economic and racial justice, fair treatment of the workplace, and the right to form unions. Today, we are joined by Seth and Michael to have this amazing conversation for our Labor Day. And we hope that it serves as a resource, as a launchpad for your congregation to address the current conditions of working people and to reaffirm the commitments to worker justice every single day. And now, beloveds, I turn it over to you. Welcome, Seth. Welcome, Michael. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you, Ellie, for having me again. It is a gift to be here with you, with all of you calling in, and certainly with my friend, Michael Szpak of the AFL-CIO, because it is Labor Day weekend upon us, and because of what we are and can be building together as congregations within the United Church of Christ and in our civic lives outside of Sunday. I'm going to begin by reading a few words from one of my predecessors, Reverend Dr. Edith Rassel, and her book, The Way of Abundance, Economic Justice in Scripture and Society, to kind of tee up for kind of everyday folks the terms of what we mean when we talk about labor rights and organizing and unions. And then, Michael, I'm going to tee you up with a couple questions to get us rolling. So I will say, in pulling from Dr. Rassel's work, that in the workplace, 2 factors greatly influence wages, benefits, and working conditions. Those are workers' bargaining power and public policy. Unions play important roles in both these areas. A lone worker generally has little power in the workplace and must accept whatever pay and working conditions an employer offers. But when workers come together in a union, they can exert pressure for better wages and benefits, negotiate workplace rules and procedures for dealing with problems, and have a voice in the workplace about decision making. And as we established in our previous webinar, we know that living wages have not kept up with need, that ideally, nationally, our living wage average would be about $22 an hour. But unfortunately, the share of the labor force represented by a union has been falling for decades. In 2019, just 12% of workers were represented by a union, down from 27% in 1973. The fall in union membership and the decline in the power of unions in the political arena are key reasons for the inability of workers to transform rising productivity into rising wages. The fall in middle-class incomes tracks the decline in union membership and the political power of unions. Unions are good for workers, beloved, especially those in the bottom and middle of the wage scale. A worker covered by a union contract earns on average 13% more than a similar non-union worker and has better benefits. Unions narrow the historic wage disadvantages suffered by women and people of color. When unions are strong, they set a standard for an entire industry or occupation, raising wages for non-union as well as union workers. Many problems present in workplaces today could be addressed by unions, such as scheduling abuses, lack of paid sick leave, and managers assigning workers too few hours. What prevents union demands from becoming excessive is the realization that everyone's wages and continuing employment depend on the firm's success. Through the process of collective bargaining, a firm's union and management seek to find the appropriate balance between the needs of the workers and the needs of the firm. Many mainline Protestant and Catholic bodies have supported trade unions and organizing. In fact, in 2017, Pope Francis declared, "There is no good society without a good union." So on that note, we have Reverend Dr. Michael Szpak from A Good Union, the AFL-CIO. And before we jump into other questions about who you are in your work, Michael, I'm wondering if you might be able to kind of spell out the acronym for us and give us an overview of, people will see it in newspapers and headlines, but what is the AFL-CIO, and broadly in layman's terms, how does it operate?
Well, I'm very happy to be with you today, and I appreciate this opportunity to speak about the AFL-CIO and the work we do. First of all, the AFL-CIO is not a union. That's the first misconception. It's the American Federation of Labor hyphen Congress of Industrial Organizations. Now, some would say that that name doesn't mean, doesn't have a lot of verve to it in 2024. But when the AFL, which was a group of unions and primarily in the building trade sector, and the CIO, which were unions in the manufacturing sector, steel, auto, etc. When they came together in 1955, they formed the AFL-CIO. And the AFL-CIO is a federation of 60 unions, national unions. Some are called international unions because they may have members in Canada or in Mexico. But for the most part, the workers represented in the federation by the 60 unions are based in the 50 states. Now, you have to understand that structural, and this is very important, is that the AFL-CIO, as a federation of 60 unions, also has the same replication on the local level and the state level. So every state has an AFL-CIO state federation, and that state federation is composed of the of representatives from the unions that form the federation of the AFL-CIO. So, and then from there, on the local level, there's a central labor council, and we'll be referring to these throughout. But the Central Labor Council, on a local level, wherever it may be, has those same affiliated unions as part of, in their jurisdiction, that are members of their Central Labor Council. So you have these affiliated unions having representation on the state level through a state AFL-CIO structure, and on the local level through a Central Labor Council structure. What you need to understand is that in all of the 50 states are covered by a jurisdiction of a Central Labor Council. So in terms of ministry, et cetera, a good entry point on the local level to the unions that are engaged in actions on the ground in your area would be through a Central Labor Council.
Well, thank you so much for elucidating kind of the breakdown and framework. Two things come to mind. One is that for congregations who may not already know or have union workers in their pews, I think we can safely say that they could quickly and easily find unions and workers fighting for rights very nearby, based on what you described, for those who might not otherwise assume that there's any labor organizing going on. And the second thing, especially for those of us from and within the United Church of Christ, that resonates about what you're sharing is that our polity, our governance, is very congregationalist. The local congregation assembles itself, has power, and builds up into associations and conferences, and then a national setting that follows. Our marching orders come from within, essentially a federation of congregations. So there's a unique synchronicity there, I think, and how we're established. I want to, before we get into kind of some of the stories of past solidarity and then present opportunities, jump into something real quick though, because we love storytelling as part of Nurture the Soul, recognizing that through the telling of stories, we find connection and then organizing power. Starting with your own story, one thing that stood out from your bio is that you got started in this long and illustrious, hardworking career of doing this when you were an undergrad at Boston College, which is something we have in common. I actually did my graduate in pastoral care and counseling at Boston College over there at the very end of the Green Line. And I am really curious what it was personally that hooked you into that work. This is not something that I think a lot of uh, undergraduate students are finding themselves doing necessarily, and obviously it led to this career of advocating for worker rights. So, if you can recall, what was it that got you started over there in Chestnut Hill?
Well, quite frankly, um, I, my own life experience has um, focused me in that direction. Um, when I was 6 months old in Massachusetts, uh, in Western Massachusetts, where the textile industry was very dominant, uh, my father was a mechanic in a textile mill, master mechanic, and he moved with the mill from Adams, Massachusetts, to Greenville, South Carolina, when I was 6 months old. And when I was 4, he was electrocuted in the plant. And my mother and myself, we moved back to Massachusetts. Of course, there was no workers' compensation in South Carolina for sure, not for an electrocution. There just wasn't available. My mother received no insurance. I mean, luckily there was Social Security. Social Security was a very important program that labor was very instrumental in pushing forward. So throughout my life, my mother always reminded me about what happened there. And that has always stayed with me. That the mill owner never took care of you, that she expected something from the corporation that never came. And so when I became a student at Boston College, I was very active in a group on campus, which was doing civil rights work. Selma was going on at the time. I had the opportunity of going with the group to Selma, and then when we came back, the farm workers were suddenly on campus, and so the boycott, the Great Boycott, was raging at the time, and the UFW, United Farm Workers
Cesar
America,
Chavez.
Cesar Chavez, yes, yes. While they were organizing groups on campuses to do boycott work. And I became active in that way. And then from there, uh, I became, well, I went into the military after I graduated, but I became a teacher in the Boston public school system, which I was a union member there. And I had, when I went to social, I went to social work school and received a master's in social work. My fieldwork placement was with the Amalgamated Clothing and Textile Workers Union, which was doing a boycott of Ferris slacks and jeans in San Antonio. And we were organizing picket lines in front of, as a social work student, I was organizing, as part of my fieldwork placement was organizing student actions in front of retail stores that were selling Farrah slacks. And then from there, I became involved with the with a group called the Movement for Economic Justice, and became a field staff person. And we were organizing in the Carolinas a rate increase fight with the Duke Power Company in North Carolina and South Carolina. And from that, I became involved in support for the Duke Power strikers, the Brookside Mine strike, and then, so it was a gradual move up from one struggle to another.
No, it's beautiful, and I think that sets us up really well for my next question, and thank you for sharing all of that, because what obviously comes out is that this is in your primordial bones, your foundational relationships, and from there it extends into your relationship and contact points through college and learning and working and everything, and it speaks to, I think, a couple things that are true in the work for justice, which is that sustaining work for justice doesn't have and to maintain it over decades as you have, and something I found in my own career is sustained by relationship, to knowing your why. What would I do for my own family? In your case, literally, what would I do for the students here, the folks who pick the food on my table? And when you find yourself in actual tactile relationship with those folks, well, then it becomes a very fulfilling venture, never a draining one. And you also see the victories along the way, like in Selma and the United Farm Workers and so on. And so it's not about, oh, here I am doing my good deeds over there. It's just, it comes out of who we are organically. And I think as you were kind of walking through your journey, you just arrived at a point that I remember scribbling a lot of notes on when you and I first talked earlier this year, that speaks to where, I'm wondering if you can give us an example now. It was mentioned in Dr. Rassel's summary of the good of unions, that people of faith and conscience have often been in solidarity with the kind of work you're describing. But if you can give us one good story, a minute of from your experience of, I think, the United Church of Christ and others doing the kind of work you're describing, being involved in.
Well, first of all, I have to say that your predecessors in the Board for Homeland Ministries of the United Church of Christ were very, very active supporting the mine workers in particular struggles. And Brookside was one of those. The Brookside mine strike, which was in 1973, the United Church of Christ was very present. 180 strikers. They were up against the Duke Power Company, which owned this mine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the Board for Homeland Ministries was active in terms of supporting a Citizens Commission, which took testimony on what the strikers were going through. And it was a very important part that they played in advertising There was a journal of social, I believe it was a Journal of Social Issues that the Board of Homeland Ministries did at the time, and they published the testimony that was taken by this commission in Harlan County. You know, what came out of this was an award-winning documentary called Harlan County, USA, and it documented, you know, this.
Yeah, I've seen
right.
that. I highly recommend. I just, as you were telling that story, the connections were made. I mean, it's a terrific example, and this is kind of a wonderful segue then to talking, I think, about labor in the pulpit as a program. If I can kind of tee you up and ask, so in your words, why were these people of faith coming alongside
The strikers, you know? Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Well, in my own words, it's because of their faith
Yep.
and of their beliefs.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's really amazing because the Board for Homeland Ministries really was seminal in funding the Brown Lung Association, which became, well, I mean, there were in South Carolina when I arrived there, there was only 2 persons who had ever received compensation for brown lung, and there are thousands that eventually did, and it was because of the work of the Brown Lung Associations, which the Board for Homeland Ministries was part and parcel of, and they were on the ground creating relationships as I was doing work, organizing associations in various South Carolina communities. They were there, you know, also assisting behind the scenes in terms of creating relationships and support, you know, for the work. So just beside, it was more than the money, you know, it was also this on the ground, hands-on involvement of the board. And but again, coming out of the faith experience of the United Church of Christ and the, you know, statements, resolutions, which are so important because without them, there's no guide, no focus for persons on the ground.
Absolutely. And in the United Church of Christ, I was recently digging through, you know, a couple decades of our resolutions that again come from essentially our federation of congregations that filter up to give people like me our marching orders. And it's, of course, striking and not surprising that over decades, these resolutions that call on us as a church collective to advocate for policies, programs, worker rights around living wages, universal health care, and so on. And to your point about relationships and behind the scenes, you know, churches are organizing bodies, how we organize ourselves and how we spend our time. We have infrastructure in place. We are doing relationship with each other and our community. And so the fact that we are called to seek the thriving of everyone and to be treated fairly, paid more than fairly, and are embedded in communities, there is just such a natural organic symbiosis through these connections, because unions are the relationship of people going through something together, telling a story together, just as congregations are. Which leads
we need these statements, and I'll say that because they're an entry point. They're a way of talking.
That's right.
You know, to a congregation about it is, you know, it's sort of like when you go door knocking, you know, on a political campaign, you can see, well, there's a Democrat, there's a Republican, there's a union member, a non-union, you know, I mean, you have similarly, when you approach a congregation, well, it's good to know what the position of the denominational body is. Not necessarily that people would support, you know, a particular issue because of it, but it's a way of knowing there's a potential openness.
Right.
To the issue.
Right. And that kind of gets at my cheeky but true subtitle to this webinar, whether you're watching today with us or in the future on YouTube. God gave us one day of rest. Unions gave us two. This kind of education of where we stand and who we have to thank, that people being the hands and feet of God's dreams for humanity, and where that belongs. And I'm going to set us up here now to talk about how churches can directly start to do that education and the role I hope to play in helping facilitate that. As some folks know, I'm still relatively new in my role, and then had a birth of a newborn this year. And so I'm building towards something that used to exist more formally in the UCC, but has fallen by the wayside a little bit in recent years, which is Labor Sunday, and marking and celebrating that on Labor Day weekend, which everyone has. That's a 3-day weekend that we get to predominantly enjoy for those who have that benefit and privilege. And my hope is that in 2025 and beyond, Labor Sunday will be one of many opportunities for churches to mark and name and grow their understanding, and then also their solidarity and advocacy alongside unions, to learn what the United Church of Christ and others have done, and to find themselves and realize, I think, actually, that a lot of these relationships already exist, and that the ways we vote and walk and talk in our communities impact one way or the other the rights of workers, and support one way or the other, unions or not. And part of the reason I'm so excited to be talking with you today is because there's a wonderful vehicle that the that you steward, a vehicle that the AFL-CIO has been doing for how many years, I want to ask, called Labor in the Pulpit, that is open to congregations of many faiths. And it's just such a direct, simple access point for congregations to bring in. It doesn't have to happen on Labor Day weekend. So if your congregation would still like to do this in the coming month, especially in an election year, Michael, I hope you can speak to that. But it can just be as simple as having like a 5-minute, minute for mission explanation of the power and connections of labor in one's community. So right now I'm going to set up, and I think you've brought some engaging slides to talk about the Labor in the Pulpit program, because this is one of the ways I would love for the United Church of Christ in my role, and us to have at a national level a connection, is to offer Labor in the Pulpit going forward and encourage churches to join in. So if you could speak to that program, we would really
Well, if we could tee up the slides. Our program is we're organized labor represents all faiths. All faiths are members of labor unions. So, and those of no faith. So this is our Labor in the Pulpit BEMA Minbar program. Next. So this is a webinar that we do for our AFL-CIO state federations, central labor councils, and area labor federations, which are larger groups of CLCs. But it's an abbreviated version. It's my UCC edition. Okay, next. So again, this webinar is specifically directed at our leaders, our delegates, and our affiliated local unions in the states and central labor councils. Okay, next. So we have a Labor in the Pulpit for Christian congregations, Labor on the BEMA for Jewish congregations, and Labor in the Minbar for Muslim congregations. But our focus here is Labor in the Pulpit, and we encourage we call them federated bodies, to use this opportunity to outreach to the faith community. Next. So these are just some examples of last year where we had a Labor on the BEMA presentation, a Labor on the Pulpit, and a Labor in the Minbar. One in Florida, another one in St. Petersburg, and the other in Duluth, Georgia. Okay, next. So this year, our Labor Day weekend program of course, is during the Labor Day weekend, but we also do it the weekend before Labor Day and the weekend after Labor Day. And as was mentioned before, this is a year-round program. It's a year-round program where labor can bring their concerns to congregations. Okay, next. So what is it? Well, labor and faith organizations, we have a long history of shared relationships, common bonds, as were mentioned at the beginning, social justice, equality, the dignity of all persons, racial and economic justice, democracy, fair treatment. And so the Labor in the Pulpit program, it places union speakers in Christian congregations during the Labor Day weekend or other weekends to make a 5-minute presentation about values that faith and labor share, lifting up stories, and as well as other labor concerns. Next. So why do we do it? Oh, well, we do it because many of our union members have a faith commitment and they're members of faith congregations, so that we can highlight the relationship between union, faith, and work. And it affirms the values that we share with many faith communities, as well as the opportunity to lift up these concerns. Next. So faith groups and labor unions are vital parts of the community. We share many of the same concerns, the same values. So we should get to know one another. And fourthly is the program's a way as our long-term plan to enable our federated bodies to develop relationships with the faith community in their jurisdictions. As I said, there isn't a place in the United States where there isn't a central labor council that has a jurisdiction. So, okay, next. So the history of the program is, well, in the late 1990s, the National Interfaith Committee for Worker Justice, which became the Interfaith Worker Justice, and the AFL-CIO partnered to begin the Labor in the Pulpits program for union members to speak out for worker justice during the Labor Day weekend. And many federated bodies participated in the Pulpit program in the past, and some have ongoing programs each year. What happened initially was the program was not sustained. So in 2021, the AFL-CIO relaunched the Labor in the Pulpit program to re-engage its federated bodies with the religious community in order to rekindle and broaden these relationships. Okay, next. So, and as we've already highlighted, that the social teachings and sacred texts of many faith traditions support the right of working people to organize into unions for collective bargaining. Next. So this is an overview, quick overview of the program. Next. Getting started. So a federated body, we're always looking for our federated body, the Central Labor Council, to buy in to this program. It's voluntary. But without the federated body, without the Central Labor Councils or the state federations, there's no Labor in the Pulpit program. And so we're looking, we're directing this specifically at our federated bodies to make outreach into the faith community. And we want this to be a continuing program. And that's an important part of it. Next. So we need to identify congregations that we're going to invite to be part of the program. Next. So we select denominational groups that have positions relating to organized labor, support the rights of workers to organize. And so we teach our Central Labor Council delegates, our leaders, about where there's potential for support in denominational groups in their local jurisdictions. Of course, they come up with names that they receive from their members who are members of congregations, their leaders that are members of congregations, but we're also looking to expand out. Okay, next. I always say to people during a webinar that the United Church of Christ is a place to go. If you haven't engaged the faith community before, that if there's a United Church of Christ in your area, that making an approach to that congregation will most likely result, in the possibility of making a presentation. I'd also say that I also point to Unitarian Universalists as another group in the community that support labor and can easily be approached. Okay, next. So inviting congregations to participate, we provide, sample invitation letters, urge our federated bodies to create a list of faith groups, faith leaders in their community, a spreadsheet that they can then continue to be in contact with over time. Next. Once we have located a congregation, we begin to recruit speakers, and our speakers come again from our union members, from our federated bodies, from the affiliated unions in the area. And that's part and parcel of the program, is besides inviting congregations, we're also seeking speakers from our union members. Okay, next. We do speaker training for our speakers. We have webinars, speaker training webinars. We attempt to train our speakers on making presentations, and these presentations are limited to 5 minutes. That's our goal. Next. Follow-up. Next. So, once the faith leader of participating congregations, we want to thank them. We want to acknowledge our speakers, but we also want to move in a second direction, which was to maintain the relationship, develop the relationship. So these aren't just one-offs, that it's just, oh, well, we've spoken to a congregation, so check that box. But we're looking to develop relationships, building relationships through this program. Next. Resources. Next. So on the AFL-CIO website, we have various resources. We have a Labor in the Pulpit member organizing guide and other toolkits that address Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, and Islamic congregations. Okay, next. We provide a Labor in the Pulpit example for our members to utilize. Next. Here I am, I'm speaking at Fondren United Methodist Church in Washington, D.C. last Labor Sunday. And the Labor in the Pulpit presentation focused on nursing home staffing needs and new regulations, which were being promulgated by to allow for nursing homes to have more staffing because the staffing in many nursing homes is below standards. Okay, next. Closing. Next. So we offer our federated bodies that we're willing to identify faith leaders, help with follow-up, connect with faith-based organizations, and assist with outreach to Jewish and the Muslim community. Next. Our Secretary Treasurer, Fred Redmond, who is the highest ranking, historically, the highest ranking African-American union official. He's first African-American Secretary Treasurer of the AFL-CIO. His belief is that we encourage our state federations, central labor councils to partner with faith organizations at the community level to work with them to get involved with the labor and the Pulpit program this Labor Day weekend to help us reconnect with the faith community and with more members of our communities and our states, cities, and towns. Next. This is my contact information. Next. And this is the question I have for you. Now, what's the next step for UCC faith leaders? Well, UCC faith leaders can invite a central labor council to make a labor in the pulpit presentation to their congregation. As you see how much effort it takes to move, to get a speaking engagement, if there's an invite from a local congregation, that's very helpful to our central labor council. And it shows that there's, that the faith community is interested in what labor is doing. Thank you, Seth.
Michael, thank you. It's a terrific invitation, and I think really brings it home in a tactile way for this fall and years ahead. We want to open up to questions, or perhaps Ellie, you had some follow-up conversation pieces as we draw to a close.
Yes, absolutely. I invite those who are in attendance at this live webinar to submit your questions in the Q&A feature. And you can do that by running your mouse or your finger over the bottom of your screen. There is a little dialogue bubble with a question mark in it with the letters Q&A underneath. You can bring that up and chat there if you would like. Or if you enter it into chat, we'll dig for it as well. And for those of you who are joining us at a later date, we will be following up with anybody who's registered with the information that was shared in this webinar. And you are always more than welcome to reach out to Reverend Seth Wispelwey. You can find his information on the UCC website, or even me, and you would have my address because you've gotten an email from me about this webinar. And I will make sure to send your questions and or comments to the appropriate people. So thank you for that. Michael and Seth, thank you so much for digging into this really important topic. And I wonder, I have so many questions. I'm going to start with this one. Mostly Michael, I'm already thinking about next week, being Labor Day, and then also our Nurture the Soul series on our extravagant welcome and looking at our multi-religious understanding. And that makes me think about all of the work that you're talking about, this labor in the pulpit from an interfaith standpoint. So I wonder, are you able to share an example of where you have seen ecumenical and or interfaith partners coming together around this work? And kind of what was the issue, and how did you get people from all different ideologies and theologies together to chat?
Well, I'm just, again, it's values. What are the values that we share? See, it's not issue, it's values. If the issues can come out of the values, but what are our values? And what values do we share? What's important to us? And I think that's, a critical piece to this, because if we don't have similar values, then, we're not going to work effectively together on particular issues. We're doing some work around climate right now. The AFL-CIO has a climate equity in jobs roundtable series where they've been inviting persons from all sectors of the community to come together and talk about ways that we can work to on better jobs, how workers who are affected by climate issues can be supported, etc. So the faith community that has gathered around that are persons that have been doing this work and sharing these values. So the Jewish community, the Muslim community, Christian community, again, we share these values, these concerns.
Along those lines, if I may jump in, I see a question from Eric in the chat that says, I'd love to hear some conversation about stories, scripture, connections about how we preach on Labor Sunday. And I'd love to have 10 more hours to have that conversation. But certainly, as we look ahead to next year, I hope to fold in prompts and opportunities and resources that can kind of encourage this or that. But in brief, I might say, building off what you said, Michael, about values, we can look to scripture, a multitude of Jesus's own parables about what does it mean to truly live and thrive in the reign of God. There are several examples around the usury and the injustice that goes into usury of workers, and also where Jesus turns these dominant narratives of capitalist exploitation and greed on their head by showing workers getting their fair wages, and these being representative of the reign of God, of God's economic justice. A verse I turn to a lot as well is from the book of James, chapter 5. Listen, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you have kept back by fraud, cry out, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. So really brief, because again, this is a wonderful question, but just understanding, I think, Eric, where I want to pull it back to being sensitive to our time, is that what it comes back to our shared human value of belonging. And this is where I think we find ourselves in the United Church of Christ. What keeps me coming back is that I know, I have seen, I have witnessed, I've experienced that in a world that is, and in a country that is often proactively trying to withhold living wages, criminalizing those who can't afford housing, withholding universal health care, these things that people, when they come together, like unions or congregations, can achieve collectively. We are realizing God's vision for thriving humanity. And the science is also in that societies that procure these things for those who live within them actually do better, and creation itself stops groaning as much, that we are not using and polluting our air and earth as much as possible because there is collective buy-in and stakes. So I think that belonging, that radical, extravagant welcome we say we have, I know folks are hungry for it. I was reminded, thinking of this, and then Ellie, I'll let you say a final word, and I have a benediction, of a poem. I think this is from like Poems by and for Workers, called Statistics by Jim Waters, and a union man who wrote, I'm tired of listening to sunshine talk, this pie in the sky stuff, this travesty on patient toil. Let the Jesus screamers, the open shop artists and their ilk hook their necks over a flying emery wheel for 8 long hours, and to the beat and whir of machinery chant this: I work to get money to buy food to get strong, so I can work to get money to buy food and get strong. Then maybe they will understand why the church pews are empty and people die for unionism. And I think there's a lot in there to unpack, but really, I think the way we get at preaching this in a way that keeps people coming to our pews, whether they're empty or not, is to say, like, you have needs, you have rights. We are here fighting for those things. And to see it happen, to open up those opportunity and relationships, that's a legitimacy that I know our queer siblings, our impoverished siblings, our hardworking human siblings want to see. I know they're hungry. They see the banners that we put up and they come in the doors. And then what if we're preaching being like, there's no reason you should be working or maybe unable to work and not have the food you need. And when those connections happen, you could just almost point and shoot to any number of scriptural references, and the framework will be there. But when we get to that universal human belonging, I think that's my starting point. Ellie, did you have any other closing thoughts, and then I can send us out?
Yeah, no, I just want to thank you both. You've talked about some really great things that have a long history. I loved hearing about the resolutions and some of the conversations that have had at the national level, which is the national level. We only build off of what our local communities are saying that they need and want. And so when those resolutions come forth, it's really exciting to be able to support that work and to know the history. I didn't know the history of that. And so I'm grateful to both of you for that. And I want to thank.
Can I just say one thing?
Sure.
On the Edie Rassel quote that was read, I just want to say that a union contract protects workers against discrimination and unfair employer actions. You cannot be fired for your sexual orientation or your gender identity under a union contract.
Protections. No,
very
you know,
important.
that these kind of things are the vanguard that we all need to be following and establishing. I know we're near time, so I'm going to send us out with a slightly modified Franciscan benediction, or like, yes, Ellie, no, I'm not.
Yeah. Yes, real quick, you will be. Yes. So I want to thank you all for joining us for this webinar today, for our presenters. For those of you who will be returning this, please share. Please share who we are. Share about this Nurture the Soul webinar. Give them the link. And come back and join us next week. Next week, we're going to learn a little bit more about the term purple church. In a denomination like the United Church of Christ, what does it mean to lead a purple church? A church with members from across the political spectrum in the midst of a culture that is increasingly dividing us and pushing us into silos. Our panelists will explore how this works in rural and suburban settings of the United Church of Christ, as well as how our ministry can be a larger calling for our denomination. We'll be joined by Reverend Mark Pettis, Reverend Dr. Alan Hilton, Reverend Heather Kurtz, and a good friend of mine, Reverend Laura Folkline. And that is part one of a two-part series. And so please do join us soon. Again, care for yourself, care for those that are working around you. And it's over to you, Seth. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. And yes, I look forward to being in touch with many over the coming 12 months about labor in the pulpit and Labor Sunday. But for now, may God bless us with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships so that we may live deep within our hearts. May God bless us with anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of people so that we may work for justice, freedom, and peace. And may God bless us with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, starvation, wages, and exploitation, so that we may reach out our hands in solidarity, marching alongside them and striking until that pain is turned into joy and thriving. And may God bless us all with enough foolishness to believe that we can make a difference in this world, so that what we can do, what others claim cannot be done. Amen, beloved. Be well.
Siblings in Christ, if you are moved by this conversation, if what's been offered here has helped enhance your ministry, or has nurtured your soul for the journey, please consider donating to the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. Your support will help to provide programs like this, which are an essential part of our ministries in the United Church of Christ. Thank you for your support. Be blessed on your journey and know that you are not alone. We are holding you in prayer. Amen.